Hello, Tommy. Thank you so much for joining me on the Well Vegan Travel podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast because we're going to be doing a virtual vegan food tour, I should say, of Nigeria. But before we get into all of that, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing in the vegan space?
Sure. So my name is Tomi, and I have been running a platform known as the Vegan Nigerian for almost a decade now. Actually, it's quite surreal to think it's been that long. But I went vegan in my early 20s, so I was still a student at the time, and sort of making this huge transition in terms of my lifestyle, my diet, and everything that comes with that. Um, it was it was quite the experience, you know. Having grown up in Nigeria my whole life, I was born and raised in Lagos. I was used to eating mostly Nigerian food. Even after we moved to the UK, it was mostly home cooked meals, traditional Nigerian dishes. And I didn't want to give any of that up. I really had this desire to kind of hold on to my culture, even as I was making this huge transition to a vegan lifestyle. And so that was how the Vegan Nigerian really came about. It started as a blog where I would pretty much just share my favorite recipes. I would veganize a lot of the dishes I grew up eating. And then over the years, the blog sort of evolved. It turned into pop-up restaurants, doing workshops at food festivals, writing my cookbooks as well, and creating content online. So really now it's sort of this space where people can discover everything they need to know about Nigerian cuisine, but through a vegan lens. And it's really my goal to encourage people in my community in particular to find out more about the lifestyle and to realize just how accessible it actually is to live this way.
So, whereabouts are you living right now?
So I'm currently in the UK. So I'm in Surrey. It's close to London. And I've been here for a few years now. So I've had the opportunity, of course, over the years to go back home to Nigeria. And it's always interesting to sort of compare and contrast sort of, yes, how accessible veganism is in both places. You know, here in London in particular, it's growing rapidly. It's become pretty mainstream at this point. In Nigeria, we still have a ways to go, but it's definitely possible. And I've, you know, even being back home, I've been able to see the changes happen over the years, and it's just really great to see.
And you recently published a cookbook all about vegan Nigerian food. So you've just come out through doing lots and lots of research into that. So where could people find that cookbook?
Yeah, so my cookbook is called Vegan Nigerian Kitchen, and it's available online. You can go through my website and download the digital copy, but it's also available as a print copy on Amazon. So all the different Amazon stores, just type in Vegan Nigerian Kitchen and you'll see it on there.
Great, thank you. So, could you tell us a little bit about where Nigeria is in the continent of Africa and a little bit about its geography? Because I'm sure that really dictates the kinds of foods that are grown and the foods that are eaten.
Absolutely. So Nigeria is West Africa. It's one of the West African countries. And part of it in the south is a little bit coastal, actually. And then the northern part is more landlocked. And so there is actually a really huge climatic difference between the north and the south of Nigeria. So you go to the south and you have a lot of rainforests. We have more rainfall in the south. And so you'll find crops such as cocoa, palm trees. You would find root vegetables grow in abundance there as well. And then if you go further north, it actually gets drier. It's more arid, semi-arid, I would say. And so there you would find more grains being grown. So more grains, you find deciduous trees, semi-deciduous trees like baobab, for instance, which we know is like a miracle tree, but that grows north of Nigeria. And so you really do notice a difference in terms of like food availability depending on where you are. Now, of course, within Nigeria, there is a lot of movement. So, you know, ingredients from the north make their way to the south and vice versa. But if we're looking at sort of specific regional dishes from each part of Nigeria, you will see a lot of differences for sure.
So I remember when a few years ago now, I watched the documentary Invisible Vegan. I don't know whether you have seen
Oh,
it.
yes.
Yeah, and something that was really new learning for me is that, a long time ago, um, most of the foods that were eaten in that part of the world were mostly plant-based.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So this is, also a misconception about Nigerian food. I think when you speak to the modern day Nigerian, they would say a meal is not complete without meat, that meat is central to our cuisine. But when you take it many years back, I would say, because globalization has changed a lot in the country, when you take it right back, you will find that meat was actually seen as more of a luxury. So it would be something maybe you would have on a special occasion. It might be a side dish that you would add to your meal, but it wasn't consumed in the same way that it is consumed today, where it's, you could have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That simply wasn't the case back then. And so you'll find that when you really look at our cuisine as a whole, it's very plant friendly. I say this to a lot of people, especially Nigerians who are considering the lifestyle, that if you simply take away the meat from the dishes, you might want to use substitutes, or you might not even use substitutes. The meal is still incredible. It's delicious. The flavors are still there. And that's because we really champion the plant ingredients in our dishes. Nigeria is a place in the south, for instance, where we have a lot of soups and stews, which are very rich with leafy greens and root vegetables. A lot of peppers and tomatoes and onions are used in our cooking as well. So when you sort of look at all of that, it's such a wonderful cuisine to sort of adapt to a vegan lifestyle.
So, may I ask what other staples of Nigerian cuisine, like in the UK, for example, I would say potatoes are like the
Hmm.
one of the big staples, and
Yeah.
bread grown from wheat is, of course, a big staple as well. What is it like in Nigeria?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier on, in terms of like the different climatic differences, in the south, we find that root vegetables are super popular and prevalent. We have yam, African yam, cassava, for instance, cocoyam is another root vegetable that is maybe not as well known as the other two. And then we tend to eat a lot of a wide variety of leafy green vegetables. I mean, we have so many different names for the different varieties as well. While I'm here in the UK, I tend to go for spinach and kale, which is more widely available. But if you step into Nigeria, you'll find that there are even more varieties of each type, different types of spinach, different types of water leaves. We have bitter leaf as well. So really, really rich in those ingredients. And then, of course, we have the grains, which make up a huge part of our diet. So we have our rice, we have sorghum, we have millet, we have corn as well, which grows in the north. And that sort of finds its way into a lot of our dishes, whether it's fermented, whether it's simply boiled and eaten alongside one of these soups and stews that I mentioned earlier on. Or another sort of iconic image of Nigerian West African food is sort of having that sort of soupy stew alongside what we call a swallow. And just to explain to people who don't know what swallow is, kind of an unusual word to describe a type of food. But it's sort of generally made with either a root vegetable or a grain, which has been ground or pulverized, normally maybe mixed with hot water until you achieve this sort of dough-like mound. So think of things like fufu. Your listeners might know a little bit about this because it was trending on social media a few months ago. But fufu, made from either cassava or made from yam, served alongside a spinach stew. That's sort of like an iconic, classic Nigerian dish. So that sort of gives you an idea of what we eat. And the food is always very rich, I would say, if I were to describe it, very rich in flavor. We use a lot of spices and we use a lot of chili, particularly in the south where I'm from. And it's just incredibly robust, really home cooked meals, I would say.
Yeah, I look through your social media quite a lot, and it does seem like very, very comforting
Yes.
food. Really good. Could you tell us a little bit more about dishes that Nigerian people eat on a regular basis?
Sure. So one of my all-time favorites is a dish called pounded yam and egusi. So this is actually a staple where my dad is from in Nigeria, in the west side of Nigeria. And it is made using yam, of course, African yam, just boiled until it's super soft and fluffy. And then the traditional way of making it is actually in a mortar and pestle. So you would pound the yam until you have that soft dough-like stretchy consistency. And then you would serve that alongside egusi soup, which is made with a mixture of leafy greens and some ground melon seeds. And they're not sort of the regular watermelon that you might find in a supermarket. It's a special type of melon that has a very distinct nutty taste. So you ground that, you add that to the soup with your tomatoes and your peppers, and you have that alongside. And then, of course, we have the iconic jollof rice, which I think most people are aware of. This is prevalent across West Africa, but Nigeria, we have our own version of it as well. And it's pretty much a one-pot rice dish where the rice is cooked in a blend of red peppers, onions, tomatoes, and chilies. So you cook that for not a super long time, maybe half an hour, and you're left with this bright orange, flavorful rice, which you would then serve with some different sides, like maybe fried plantain. You could have it with a coleslaw or a salad of some type. We would also have it with moi moi, which is another traditional dish made out of ground beans. And that's sort of beans ground up and steamed into sort of like a pudding-like texture. So those are like the classics. So for anyone who is sort of looking for where to start in terms of trying Nigerian food, I would say start with those ones, jollof rice and then the pounded yam and egusi.
It sounds like the pestle and mortar gets a fair amount of use in your kitchen. Is that fair to say?
Well, you know what? I'm somewhat of a lazy modern cook in the sense that now, I mean, you can make pounded yam in a food processor, which takes a fraction of the time. So I tend to use that more and just sort of, there are various ways that you can adapt traditional styles of cooking, right? And so that's just one of the ways that I've modernized things.
What would be like typical breakfasts eaten in Nigeria? Because I have this hunch that it's probably very different to what I might eat for breakfast. Maybe it's very similar to what people eat for lunch and dinner. This is kind of my knowledge of some African cuisines. So how is breakfast different?
Yeah, so you really did hit the nail on the head that a lot of our main meals that we would have for lunch and dinner end up being our breakfast too. So, for instance, yam with scrambled tofu. The traditional would be yam with scrambled eggs, but I do scrambled tofu. That would be like a really hearty breakfast you could have. But then at the same time, we also have a lot of fermented porridges, which are fantastic for breakfast. We have one that is called ogi, and that is made with fermented corn. The corn is pulverized, blended to a really smooth paste, fermented over a period of, could be anywhere from 24 hours to up to a week or more. And then you would cook it like a porridge with a huge amount of hot water until you get sort of like a thick custard-like consistency. So that would also make a really good breakfast, maybe alongside one of the steamed puddings I was telling you about, the moi moi. But that's the really interesting about it is that even though we would eat that for breakfast, we can also eat it for lunch. So there isn't too much of a distinction. I mean, even when I wrote my book, for instance, I don't have a clear breakfast section as most cookbooks would have, only because, again, so many of the lunch and dinner recipes can be modified for sort of a lighter breakfast option as well.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of leftovers, and
Yeah.
I am more than happy to have last night's dinner for breakfast. Absolutely. It's I think, we often are sort of told what we should be having for breakfast, then it needs to meet these requirements. But no, that's not how
Yeah,
most of the world eats. And yeah,
not at all. Not at
it,
all.
it sounds like Nigerian food is very much whole foods. It really does come from mostly whole foods ingredients. Do they use a lot of oil as well?
Yes, they do. That is one of the things that sometimes makes the food err on the side of unhealthy, is that the amount of oil that is used to cook the food, if you're not careful, can be quite excessive. So, the oils we generally tend to use are palm oil. So this is like sustainably grown and harvested usually in the western part of Nigeria. Local farmers really sustain themselves on growing the palm fruit. And so we would use that oil in many of our traditional dishes, in our beans porridge, yam porridge, and in many of our stews and our soups as well. But then also we would use things like vegetable oils, quite simply, sometimes coconut oil as well in our cooking. But it really is up to you how much of it you want to add to your dish. When it comes to palm oil, I think obviously in recent years it's received a lot of stigma because of people's perception of how it's grown, particularly in Southeast Asia. But it's really a different case in West Africa, and you'll find that sometimes eliminating the palm oil from the dish actually removes the authentic flavor that you might want to achieve. And so a little bit goes a long way. It's a very, very flavorful oil. But if you use it in sparing amounts, you can still get that amazing flavor, and then also make the dish slightly healthier as well.
So that leads me to my next question, about like how people can access these incredible ingredients. For example, the sustainably produced palm oil that comes from that area in Nigeria. So, if people wanted to start dipping their feet into this kind of cuisine and cooking it from your cookbook, I'm sure you talk in your cookbook about where you can buy ingredients, but where is it that people can find these ingredients? Because I live close to a big city, and I think I would probably have to do a bit of a hunt if I wanted to find some
Hmm.
of these ingredients, particularly very specific vegetables and fruits that you're talking about.
Absolutely. So, if you happen to live in the city, or in a big city, then you're probably far luckier than those who maybe live in the countryside, for instance, because, especially a place like London here and most big cities around Europe and even in the US, you can find African and international grocery stores that stock a lot of these ingredients. I always like to say to people that discovering Nigerian food is the same way you would discover any other type of cuisine. If you were going to cook a dish that was authentically Thai, for instance, or authentically Japanese, you would go out and seek out an Asian store, for instance, or a Thai store, or a Japanese store. And so that I feel like that is the same energy that should be given to Nigerian cuisine as well, because the ingredients are out there. There are so many of us living in the diaspora now who, of course, cook these meals at home ourselves. So we might have maybe more a bit of an insider knowledge when it comes to easily finding these ingredients. But a quick Google search will bring up a list of African stores in your city. Many of them now, especially post-pandemic, are delivering too. So if you live a little bit further out, you might be able to get the ingredients delivered straight to your door as well. And so it's really just about keeping an eye out for these specialist stores, patronizing the family-run businesses by Nigerians or other West Africans, and yeah, and also sometimes even just going into an international store and saying, "Hey, are you guys able to source these ingredients for me?" And seeing what they can do to help in that way.
Brilliant. And something I really want to ask about is desserts. In Nigeria, do people have a sweet tooth? Do they love to make decadent or fruity desserts?
You know what? I wish we had more of a dessert culture, but we don't. For us, I would say maybe following a meal, we might have some fresh fruits. We might have, if it's mango season, we'd have mangoes or oranges, pineapples. We keep it pretty simple when it comes to, that sweet afterthing. But I love experimenting with desserts. Ever since I moved to the UK and discovering tons of British desserts, for instance, I can't get enough of it. And so I do think there is scope for us to develop more in that area in terms of our cuisine. But we are a huge snack country. Like our snack culture is high up there. And within that, we have a lot of sweet treats. And so I guess that is the way we would satisfy our sweet tooth. It would be with things like puff puff, which is sort of like, best way I can describe it is like a donut. So it's like a round fried dough, really soft and pillowy on the inside, normally seasoned with nutmeg or cinnamon. We also have things like chin chin, which are these crunchy biscuit-like snacks as well. So we do have a wide variety and a lot of coconut snacks too, a lot of sweet coconut snacks. So that is, I would say, our thing. It's a snacks more than desserts.
So, if people were to actually take the plunge and actually go to West Africa and go to Nigeria, I'm sure just like in every country in the world, there's a lot of regional differentiations, even within a country, of the kinds of foods that people are eating. So, what might people expect when they are traveling around Nigeria in terms of regional variation with food?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One fun fact about Nigeria is actually that we have something like over 300 tribes who speak like over 300 languages. And that is not even an exaggeration, yes. And so just based solely off of that statistic, you can just imagine how much variation exists from like one region to another, from even one household to another. There's so many differences. But if we're going sort of more northern Nigeria, you tend to find a lot of fermented foods. In terms of the spicing of the food tends to be on the lighter side because it's much hotter there as well. The soups are much lighter, in terms of the consistency. In terms of the ingredients, it tends to be more of like a minimal style of cooking. There's lots of, for instance, plant milks. That's another really interesting thing. Actually, a lot of people assume that just because a lot of cattle grazing goes on in the north, that they maybe drink a lot of dairy, but actually things like tiger nut milk is really popular in the north. Things like groundnut milk, even soya milk as well is consumed pretty widely in the north. And so a lot of, light, not too heavily spiced dishes in the north. And then if you go further south, it's sort of a flip and opposite of that, where it's like pungent flavors and pungent spices. You find a lot of lots of fermented foods as well, but where maybe in the north the fermentation is done for a shorter period of time, in the south it's for a longer period of time. And we all know that the longer you ferment food for, the more intense the flavor and the smell and the taste is. So those are just some of the differences that you can expect if you're sort of traveling around Nigeria. Now, I'm from the Yoruba tribe in the west. Then we have the Igbo tribe in the east. We have the Hausa in the north. Those are the three major ones. And then, like I said, so many scattered around in between. And each tribe, they have their sort of signature dishes. So it's really worth exploring. Anyone who wants to sort of dig deeper into it can definitely find a lot of information online about that, even in my cookbook as well, which differentiates between the different regional foods.
So, if some of our listeners were thinking about doing a trip to Western Africa, to Nigeria, because it's not a country that is very much visited by Europeans and by North Americans and what have you. So, what are the reasons people might like to go and visit Nigeria? What are the highlights?
Well, straight off the bat, the weather is great. I mean, we have sunshine most of the time of the year. So definitely go for the hot weather, and then the food as well. It's really unique and special. I mean, I'm from Nigeria, so maybe I'm a bit biased in saying that, but I think we have some of the best dishes out there. So definitely go for that. Go for the weather, and just go for the vibrant atmosphere. I grew up in Lagos City, which is this busy metropolitan city in the southwestern part of Nigeria, and never a dull moment is what I would say.
I've heard the traffic is quite bad there. Is that true?
It is, yes. It does help maybe if you know someone there who can maybe help you navigate, for sure. But after a while, you'd start to kind of learn a bit about the traffic system and the best times to leave the house and not to leave the house so you don't end up in a 3 hour traffic jam. But yeah, I would say that's maybe the downside of Lagos in particular. But if you go to maybe some of the surrounding states, it's less populated. Lagos tends to be one of those cities in Nigeria where everyone gravitates to. It's where people come for work. It's a big business center. And so you're definitely likely to hit a lot of traffic and sometimes even mayhem, to be honest. But then that also does come with a lot of choice. So you'll find a lot of restaurants there. You'll find a lot of nightlife, a lot of activities you can go to. So I would say if you can stomach, loud environments, then Lagos definitely will be for you.
And what about like natural beauty and wildlife in the country? Are there the opportunity to see a lot of animals? I know you're on the coast. Nigeria is on the coast as well. So are the beaches really lovely? Like, how is it to get out into nature? And what could you
So,
see?
in Lagos in particular, we have a number of amazing beaches, and at some of them, you can even do boat rides as well. So they provide that for tourists and for locals. So that's always lovely to do. But then if you want to see more, I guess, of nature and greenery, you might need to go more inland, in Nigeria. So I'm thinking of places like Abeokuta, which has like the famous Aso Rock Monument. So that's, another place that tourists love to go to and see. But yeah, you definitely want to move outside of the city, more towards the rural areas if you want to experience more of nature. If you're in Lagos, then it's a lot of buildings and it's like London basically, but times 10.
Fantastic. And what about wildlife? Are there a lot of animals to see? And I don't. Are there safari experiences? I think no. Am
No,
I?
no, not safari experiences, but I know in Lagos there is a conservation park, where the animals are sort of just living and, going about their everyday business. But as a tourist or as a guest, you can actually go and safely sort of navigate that area and see the different species as well. So yeah, it is possible to see that, but no safaris, no.
Since you've become vegan, which was a while ago now, I'm sure you've been back to Nigeria a few times. How is it like to travel around Nigeria as a vegan, particularly given now a lot of people are eating meats, and I'm sure that's reflected in restaurant menus. So how is that, and how might other vegans navigate this?
Yeah, so it can be pretty challenging, being vegan in Nigeria, only because you find that even though a lot of our dishes are very plant heavy, plant friendly, you might find little sneaky ingredients in there that are not quite vegan. It might be the stock that's used, it could be beef stock or chicken stock that finds its way into what should normally be a plant-based dish. And so that's one thing I would say to look out for, if you are traveling around Nigeria, is just to be very careful that a dish may appear completely plant-based, but definitely investigate what might be in there. But one thing I would say that encourages me is that each time I go back, there are just more options. In fact, the last time I was there, I was able to visit the very first vegan restaurant to be opened in Nigeria. It's located in Lagos, in Ikoyi, and it's called Veggie Victory, and it's fully vegan, run by a vegan owner as well. And they pretty much serve like a lot of traditional Nigerian meals, but veganized. And it was such a lovely experience, and also to learn that the community there keeps on growing. So they have regular meetups and they have potlucks as well. And so it's great. I see it growing over time, really, because now it's not unusual to maybe go to a cafe in the city and discover that there is now a vegan option on the menu. whereas like 5 years back, 10 years back, that just wouldn't have been the case. So that's a really positive thing. But in terms of tips I would give to anyone traveling, definitely um, go prepared. If you can also find accommodation that allows you to cook your own meals, that is a bonus because then you can, really, really revel in the variety of like plants and, vegetables and fruits that we have to offer, but then cook them in your own way without the animal products. And then definitely ask lots of questions when you go to the restaurants, and I'm sure you'll be fine.
Yes, I've traveled a fair amount since I've been vegan, and I have never once gone hungry the
Right.
entire time. Like, sometimes it's maybe not been super, super inspiring. Lots of fried rice, for example, for a few meals in a row. It really isn't that much of a big deal at all. It's fine. You're never going to go hungry. That's my experience.
Yeah, for sure. There's always a way.
I'm so excited about sharing this with our audience. I love doing these virtual vegan food tours, especially when people are still a little bit reluctant to travel, because there's so many amazing ways that we can travel at home, whether it's through film or books or through food. And I really encourage absolutely everybody to go and check Tomi out and her book and decide to maybe spend a few months digging into this kind of cuisine, Nigerian food. I think our minds will be opened if we all did more of this kind of more of these kinds of activities. So, Tomi, tell us again where people can find you and follow you and learn what you're doing.
Sure. So you can find me on my website, vegannigerian.com. And then, of course, I'm very active on social media. So do pop over to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and I am there at Vegan Nigerian. And then, of course, if you want to find out more about my cookbook, all the details are on my website as well. So you can find it all there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Tomi.
Thank you for having me.